acknowledge the Indian High Commissioner Muktesh Pardeshi, the Police Commissioner Andy Costa, who is here, Deputy Commissioner Wally Homaha. It's wonderful to see you as well. I want to acknowledge the Honourable Jenny Salisa, Krishna. I acknowledge you, Paul Goldsmith, who I understand you're speaking later tonight. And I'm going to be cruel and ask the candidates and other MPs who I may have missed in the room, I do want to acknowledge you. Please, would you mind standing? Of many persuasions who are here. Wonderful to have MPs and candidates supporting this event tonight, and my acknowledgements to you. And finally, my former colleague but current friend, Dr. Rajam Prasad, and of course Venkat and the team from Indian Newslink, and Robert and Radio Tirana. Wonderful to have the sponsorship and support for this too. And to the Auckland Indian Association, in this your centenary year, can I congratulate you on such a significant milestone, but also add a word of personal thanks for the work that you did during the COVID-19 lockdown to support the community with care packages, to look after students or those who may not have had the usual support networks, and for continuing to do that work now. My sincere thanks to you. Do you know, it feels fitting that I join you this evening at the conclusion of the parliamentary term for this session of Parliament. Yesterday, I had the honour of signing papers for the Governor-General confirming the dissolution of Parliament. Last night, we completed a couple of critical pieces of legislation, including the budget, and today we formally held our adjournment debate. The last few weeks have been full of the usual ceremonies. They include things like final caucus meetings and valedictory speeches and farewell. It's a reminder that the time that we spend in Parliament can often feel quite long, and at other times it can feel incredibly short. And at times I feel like I'm experiencing both simultaneously. Perhaps that's because my time in politics started well before I became a Member of Parliament. I graduated from Waikato University at the end of 2001, and I spent my last semester at Arizona State University. But before I departed New Zealand for my stint in Phoenix, I remember having a few weeks spare and offered to come and do some work for the then MP for New Plymouth, Harry Duynhoven. It just so happened that Harry had a fellow MP and friend who was in need of a ministerial secretary to cover a staff member who was on leave. That friend was Phil Goff. Phil will probably barely remember that time, but I remember it incredibly well. It was only 2 short weeks, but long enough that when I graduated, I was offered a full-time place in Phil's office as a researcher. Phil was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but also the Minister of Justice, and it was the latter that I primarily worked on. At around the time I started in the office, the Ministry of Justice had completed a fairly hefty and highly anticipated piece of research on the Sale of Liquor Act. I was roped in that week to help with the distribution of the report. Send the report out to the government MPs, I was told, and when you're done, then you can start on getting it to the opposition MPs as well. I got to work and studiously got the first tranche dispatched so quickly that I managed to get the report to all members of the House before the close of play. I remember feeling quietly chuffed when my line manager walked in. "Where are the reports?" he said. "Gone," I replied. I can still remember his face. It was less the face of someone pleased with their new employee and more the face of someone stifling an anguished scream. What he hadn't quite explained to me was that this much anticipated and somewhat controversial report was embargoed. And I had not only broken the embargo, I had done so by sending it to every opposition MP in the New Zealand Parliament. There was a momentary pause while the horror set in. Then he left the room to go and share the news with my boss, Phil Goff. He was gone for what felt like an eternity, and when he re-emerged, he told me that Phil had requested a cup of tea. That was my cue to face the music. I made that cup of tea like it was my final act of employment. I walked into Phil's office, sat the tea down, and waited for my marching orders. Phil looked up from his desk and he said just 8 words. "Hello, Jacinda. I heard about your open democracy." He then let out the kind of hearty laugh that only Phil Goff can deliver, and I have found that laugh a great relief ever since. I didn't lose my job that day. In fact, I stayed on for 3 more years, eventually finishing in Helen Clark's office. I could have easily stayed in roles like that, working behind the scenes. I had a quiet plan to eventually finish up, though, and join the New Zealand Police, a profession my father had been part of for the better part at that time of 30-odd years. And I thought it would be a good career for me, if only I could master the beep test and the press-ups required. But I didn't leave, and I didn't join the police, and nor did I stay behind the scenes. And the reason why is my response to the topic that you've put to me tonight. I ended up in politics and ultimately here before you because I have always believed that New Zealand has within it the power and the values to live up to the expectations we already have of ourselves. If you ask anyone, no matter what their background, their age, or even the length of their time that they have called themselves a Kiwi, if you ask them what it is that defines this place and us, you'll hear some common themes. We see ourselves as egalitarian. We are fierce defenders of the simple concept of fairness. And perhaps because of that, nothing gets our back up more than injustice. We love our landscapes, our waterways, our environment. We believe in hard work and problem solving. We are both pragmatists and dreamers who don't believe in things being too hard or impossible. And we instinctively, as isolated island dwellers, we know that what we do impacts on others and that we have a duty of care to one another. So if you ask me then what my vision is for New Zealand, I will tell you it is to live up to the ideals and vision we already have of who we are and what we can be. To be egalitarian, to be clean and green, a place where good ideas grow and where we're good for the world. And I utterly believe that we have that within our power. Gandhi once wisely said, "The difference between what we do and what we are capable of doing would suffice to solve most of the problems of the world." That's certainly the case here in New Zealand. We are a wealthy nation, wealthy enough to make sure every child born in this country has a chance to live up to their potential and to rid ourselves of child poverty. We have the resources that with the right decision-making and investment will see that everyone has a decent education and access to world-class healthcare. We have the innovators and small business owners that with a mixture of incentives and support can create the high-wage jobs that our people deserve. We have the growers, farmers and manufacturers to maintain our credentials as a trading nation that's good for everyone. We have an environment that with the right protections can keep producing the products we pride ourselves on, while still restoring waterways and landscapes that we equally trade on too. We even have the wind, sun and water to support our transition to an economy fueled by renewable electricity and all of the opportunities that brings in a climate-aware world. We have the potential to solve the problems that we have faced for some time and that the world is collectively facing too, and to be all the stronger for it. And that is what we've set out to do. But none of that is always especially easy. I can still remember very early on in our term in government a phone call I had with Minister Megan Woods. She had to make a pressing decision about what to do about the block offers for oil and gas exploration. It started a chain of discussions about our future, and we knew the consequences of that decision for future generations, for the people of Taranaki, for the workers. But it was an example of the calls that have to be made now, lest we make it even harder for ourselves down the track. Now that decision to end offshore oil and gas exploration, coupled alongside ETS reform, Zero Carbon Act, a landmark agreement on the primary sector to price emissions in the future, that has made climate change our nuclear-free moment. But many of New Zealand's larger challenges will not be changed instantly. Child poverty, even with $5 billion in investment and the introduction of new income support and legislation holding us to account on poverty targets, they will still need our attention and our commitment for years to come. Which may cause some of you to very fairly ask whether any of these challenges, or indeed even an overarching vision for New Zealand, can really be achieved when we are in a time and a place that is so fraught with challenge, or, as I've heard it called much more frequently, these unprecedented times. My answer to that is yes. I would argue that maintaining our sights on the New Zealand we believe in and want to build is as important now as it ever was. And while there are, of course, different magnitudes to the challenges we face as a nation, there are always challenges. I recall when we first came into office being faced with a very early but hugely significant problem: Mycoplasma bovis. The disease had slowly been spreading through New Zealand's herd, but its presence had only been fairly recently discovered. I still remember receiving advice as a brand new government around the state of this biosecurity disaster. I was told that it had the potential to devastate our dairy industry, and the only real way to stop that was to try and eradicate it. The only catch was no country that had M. bovis show up in their herd had ever managed to eradicate it before. We set about answering the question of what to do. We pulled together a team of experts to give us the best advice possible, but it was still going to have to come down to a judgment call. After working with the industry and those most affected by the decision, we came to a call together. No one had done it before, but that wasn't a reason not to try. We chose to eradicate. And so we rolled out our plan to get rid of Mycoplasma bovis, and I can tell you that 3 years later, we are on track to succeed. I suspect that perhaps political careers, and indeed governments, are often defined not by what they intended to do, but what happens along the way to your planned destination. Regardless, the values we apply should be the same. We didn't anticipate bovis, but we knew what was important to us: our brand, our reputation, the long-term welfare of our animals, and our belief that we could only call something impossible once we'd tried it for ourselves. We didn't anticipate March 15, but it was the values of kindness and a belief in our collective humanity that prevailed. And we couldn't anticipate COVID, but it is once again a moment in time for us to apply a vision for who we are in the face of a 1 in 100-year health and economic crisis. And I hope that you can see that. I hope you see it in our immediate response to COVID, which was to protect our people's health and well-being. It was in our recovery plan and the investments in wage support and free training and apprenticeships. I hope you see it as we move to rebuild, where the focus not just on jobs, but on the kind of jobs that support our environment and therefore our future. I hope you see it as we support our small business owners with loan schemes and our innovators with R&D support. At every turn, be it crisis or opportunity, lies a chance to emphasise what truly matters to us. I may not have necessarily planned to be here in this most privileged of roles, but perhaps, just perhaps, that non-linear path prepared me for the very non-linear time in this job. That even if you have a vision for what we can be, the true test is our ability to maintain that path no matter what challenges come our way. I want to thank you for the chance to come here tonight to very briefly reflect on some of the ideals that led me into politics and some of the aspirations that have kept me here. And while I can and while I'm here, I do want to extend my thanks to each and every one of you who has been part in recent times of a true team effort in the face of so many challenges. It has been and will always be my privilege to govern in these times. My very best wishes to all of you for the remainder of the year ahead. Janya Vad and no mai harimai.